So, science and society. So this is in this kind of piece we're going to look at how science impacts society, and then how society impacts on science as well. So this is something very important for you to understand in your study of science. You need to know kind of, how these two entities, if you like, how they interact with each other. So in this lesson, we will look at the following learning outcome. So students should be able to appreciate the role of science in society and its personal, social, and global importance. So how it's important to you as a person, how it's important to society, and then how it's actually important to the globe then as well, and how society influences scientific research. So these are kind of, interdependent. If we think about it, so from how does science impact you personally? So if you think about the room maybe that you're sitting in now, it's heated, probably. It has electricity in the room. It's quite comfortable. If you think about the materials that have been used to build, for example, the structure that the room itself, and then to build all of the furniture and electronics and that are actually in the room as well. So take also as well, you might be viewing this, for example, on a laptop or maybe on a smartphone. So there's a lot of technology that went into creating that. So all of this comes from science. It comes from you know people being interested in how the world works, and then being able to use that understanding to make new products and new materials. And that's kind of like how science impacts on society. So science affects society by developments such as electricity. So we can't understate, for example, electricity. There was a time, for example, in Ireland, not that long ago, that we did not have electricity, and we know what it's like. For example, if we go a week and the electricity goes out, it's actually quite uncomfortable. So it is for that period of time. So this is something that we really very much depend on, and kind of our understanding of electricity, and particularly then electronics, goes hand in hand with scientists' understanding, for example, of how atoms work, and then how the subatomic particles, such as electrons, how they work then as well. And then the development of new resistors and materials that go into computer chips. So developments in areas such as electricity, electronics, and digital technology, and that's huge even now at the moment. There's massive developments in technology all of the time. And if you stop and think about it, this plays a huge role in our lives every single day. These three. So disease control, uh, new materials, and drugs. So if we take, so this is a guy here who a picture of a guy who has smallpox. So smallpox is all but eradicated by science through the development of vaccines, and this is a horrible disease that creates an awful lot of human suffering as well. So by scientists trying to understand how disease works, by medical doctors trying to understand how the human body works, all of this helps to in the fight against disease and to come up with new ways at treating particular types of diseases as well. So disease control, new materials, and new drugs then as well. So if we take, for example, the COVID virus, that caused major problems as we've seen. And one of the ways to fight against that was to use a vaccine. And then also other ways to fight that was for doctors and scientists to look at how the virus works and coming up with protocols in relation to how to treat people who are infected with the virus as well. So these are all, so the disease control is a huge area. Um, Discoveries about our solar system. So again, if we take this here, so this is the Hubble Space Telescope. Um, and developments in like technology such as SpaceX and makes it like reusable rockets that can make it easy to put satellites, and also to put up like observation satellites such as the Hubble Space Telescope. And what that does is it gives us a view out into our solar system. So we're not just limited now to the planet. We can actually look at the planet. So, for example, there's also the International Space Station in space. It enables scientists to actually look down at the planet and have a bird's eye view and try and understand like how these big systems on the planet work, like weather systems and things like that. And all of what that does is it increases human knowledge, and it makes it more, we can understand, for example, how our environment works a bit better. We also have the Curiosity space rover that's on Mars, and again, that's like a huge feat in human technology. And what that's doing is it's exploring the surface of Mars, and again, building up our knowledge of the solar system and the planets that are around us in our solar system. Um, Also then as well, like it gives us like fantastic views such as this. The Hubble Space Telescope makes it like possible for us to actually look out into the vastness of space. So developments in new ways of producing energy. So energy, the production of energy is a massive component in relation to humans and how we live. At the moment, we're very much reliant on fossil fuels, but with the development of new technologies such as like windmills, for example, if you look all around the country in Ireland, you'll see windmills everywhere. But by developing these new technologies, it means that we can come up with ways to meet our energy demands. So we need energy, for example, to power all of our components and our electronics. Um, so by scientists, like first of all, scientists discovered, they made an engine that was able to burn petrol or diesel, or the petrol engine. And what that caused major problems. It made it easy for people to kind of get around from spot A to spot B. We were able to transport loads of goods and products from point A to point B. But what that started to do was it started to pollute the environment, and it started to accelerate this process of what's called global warming. So there's always a double-edged sword in all of these developments then as well. And that's kind of like so science has a huge impact positively on society. It makes it, it makes our lives more comfortable. Like even if you take, there was a time, before general anesthetic. Um, so imagine if you had to go to the dentist and you had to get a tooth extracted without any anesthetic. So again, the development of science in drug development makes it much more comfortable for you when you go and have to get like a fill-in, or you have to get a tooth extracted as well. So it's very pervasive. It impacts every aspect of our lives. So these are some of the ways that science affects society. So these are just like, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I'm going to get you to do some research yourselves and look at particular topics in this area. Now, so it's a two-way system then as well. So there has to be checks in place as well. So society guides science. So governments will make funds available. So this is a huge thing in relation to if I'm a scientist and I want to research a particular area. Like the government may give me a grant and give me money and funding so that I can go ahead and I can start to carry out some of the research that I want to carry out. Now, also as well, the other side of it then is that they also control science as well. So they pass laws based on science. So there's laws, for example, when policy is being developed, it can be developed on the back of science. But also then as well, society can impact on what scientists are allowed to study. So there, from an ethical point of view, we don't want to increase human suffering. So certain forms of science might be banned or restricted until, like, it has to all be done in a risk-based way. And also as well, science can restrict the use of, or society can restrict the use of science then as well. So some of the areas that have been kind of fairly, so this here is a picture of Chernobyl. So it's a nuclear power plant in Ukraine. And during the time when nuclear power plants were being developed, Russia wanted to develop a nuclear power plant in line with what America was doing as well. So there was a lot of it was rushed through in order for the power plant to be open and for them to compete with the US. Now the problem was that it was a relatively new technology. Science had discovered, for example, radioactive material and how to use radioactive material, and then engineers used that knowledge to build a nuclear power plant that supplies energy for the demands of the Ukrainian people in the Ukraine. But something went wrong. There was one of the nuclear reactors exploded, and that was a major problem. And I would recommend on Netflix, there's a good series called Chernobyl. It goes through all of that whole disaster and what happened. But it caused major problems because we understand how, like they were only kind of starting to understand how radioactive material worked at the time, and this caused a major problem. And what happens now is in Chernobyl, there's a whole area in Chernobyl that's inaccessible to humans, unless you're wearing like protective equipment. But this shows, for example, how society has to have an oversight on science and how science works, and what scientists do, and then what's allowed to be done, because it can help to prevent disasters such as this in Chernobyl. Also, as well, there was this. So this is Dolly the sheep who was genetically a cloned sheep. So this is the whole area of DNA and how DNA works. And this is something that scientists have a really good handle on now, and they kind of understand how it works. But at the time, that was pretty controversial, actually cloning a sheep. Obviously, then you would not be allowed to clone a human to make a copy, for example, to make a copy of yourself. Um, but there is a whole industry of designing babies, for example. So where you have, so you can go, for example, and um, you can get like an egg and a sperm fertilized, and you can screen out for certain diseases and traits that are have a genetic component. So that's something that's kind of on the cusp of being controversial. But that again is something that how science impacts on it. So this here is just an abandoned house, for example, in Chernobyl, and it just shows, like, for example, there's whole areas in Chernobyl that after that nuclear disaster that are not accessible now to humans. Um, the more modern kind of versions of science and on what's happening is so this is another area in the development of 3D printing. So this is an amazing area. They can actually 3D print all kinds of structures, and they can actually, what's happening now is people are able to 3D print guns. So they're actually able to 3D print a gun. Now this is something that, should this be allowed, should laws be brought in to restrict the use of this technology. But if you restrict the use of the technology doesn't advance as well. But then the other side of it is that you want to be able to keep people safe. So if somebody can just easily print up a 3D gun in their garage, for example, and then they can use that gun to do whatever they want. That's something that society has to have some kind of oversight on it. And I'm going to get you to do some research on this particular area as well. Another massive area now that is already impacting all of our lives, but it's going to even more so impact our lives as we go into the future, is this development of AI, so artificial intelligence. So at the moment, they are very close to developing what's known as general artificial intelligence. So these are like systems that are, think about them like really advanced calculators that are able to process huge amounts of information and give us back like models, and it holds a huge amount of promise in for how in our society and for the future then as well. So at the moment, some of these AI systems are actually able to, for example, they're able to write whole essays. Just give them a couple of keywords and it can write a whole essay for you. It's able to generate pieces of art. Um, so, and it, like, you just give it a couple of keywords and it's able to replicate pieces of art. And this is something that's really interesting as well. So here, for example, is a piece of artwork that was generated by an AI system, and it literally takes them, a couple of like minutes to generate like pieces of art that look like this. So you just give it a couple of keywords, and it'll actually generate a whole piece of art that looks something like this. And again, this is like seriously competing with artists, for example, in the field. Also, another area that is very advanced now in relation to AI is you can give, for example, you can give it a couple of keywords and it can actually write whole pieces of text for you, and even write a whole book for you as well. So this is something that you can actually see now when you do a bit of research. You'll see. So there are AI co-authored AI books. So for example, you can use an AI system to write, to write chapters in a book for you, and then as a writer you become more of an editor, and you can go back and kind of change around or modify the book that you're looking at. But again, this gives a serious advantage to people that understand how to use these systems, and is it fair, should it be allowed, and maybe, like, should it be restricted? If we restrict it, it stops the progression of this technology as well. So AI as well, it also offers a lot of insight into understanding how disease works, how to model complex models. So things like environmental change and to stop global warming. That's a very complex problem, and in some ways, maybe we need these AI systems in order to be able to build and process the huge amounts of complex data that's needed, and the huge amount of processing that needs to be done in order to actually be able to come up with real problems or real solutions to these particular types of problems then as well. So again, society is going to have a massive impact on that. Some things will be allowed, other things will not be allowed. Laws will be brought in, funding will be restricted, or funding will be given, and they're ways that society has a huge impact on what science does and how science works. So hopefully that kind of serves as an introduction. So it's just being able to appreciate the role of science in society. So we've looked at the advantages and disadvantages that science brings to society, how it can impact on you, how it impacts on like from a global point of view, and how society influences scientific research then as well. So how society can restrict science and how it works. Okay, so thank you for listening.